Have you ever wondered how we got here? I mean, really here. We're about to dive into the biggest story ever told, the story of life itself. It's an epic tale that starts with cosmic explosions and molten planets and leads, somehow, to the incredible, complex world we see all around us. So where on Earth, or off it, does a story like this even begin?
Well, before you can have life, you need a place for it to exist. You need a universe. And ours is mind-bogglingly old. We're talking 13.8 billion years. It all kicked off with the Big Bang, this unimaginable flash of energy that set everything, all of space and time, into motion. Okay, let's zoom in a lot. Fast forward about 9 billion years and you get to our home, planet Earth. It formed about 4.5 billion years ago, but for hundreds of millions of years, it was nothing more than a sterile, lifeless rock. Which, of course, leads us to the biggest question of all.
Right? How do you possibly get from a barren planet of rock and gas to rainforests and coral reefs and, well, us? This is the central mystery that scientists have been trying to solve for centuries, and it's one of the greatest detective stories you'll ever hear.
So let's start at the very beginning. The first major hurdle is the spark itself. How could life possibly get started on a planet that had absolutely none? You have to understand early Earth was, to put it mildly, not a very nice place to live.
Just try to picture it, a surface that's literally molten rock, endless volcanic storms, and an atmosphere thick with nasty gases like methane and ammonia. There is no protective ozone layer like we have today, so the whole planet was just getting blasted by intense ultraviolet radiation from the sun. This is the wild, hostile stage where the story of life had to begin.
For a long time, people had a pretty simple idea called spontaneous generation. You know, the idea that mice could just appear from piles of straw, or that maggots were born from rotting meat. But then the brilliant Louis Pasteur came along and proved, nope, that's not how it works. Life only comes from other life. And while that was a huge scientific leap, it created a massive paradox. If life only comes from life, where did the first life come from?
And this is where the modern idea of chemical evolution steps in. A couple of scientists, O'Perrin and Haldane, proposed this amazing idea. They said, maybe before biological evolution, there was chemical evolution. The idea was that the intense energy of early Earth, all that lightning and volcanic heat, could have zapped the simple chemicals in the atmosphere and oceans, rearranging them into the basic building blocks of life.
Now that's a cool theory, but how in the world could you test it? Well, in 1953, a scientist named S.L. Miller decided to try. He basically built a little mini primordial Earth in a bottle. He put in all the gases they thought were in the early atmosphere, added some water, cranked up the heat, and then zapped it with electric sparks to act like light.
The results were absolutely world-changing. After just a week, Miller checked the water, and what did he find? It was full of amino acids. These are the literal building blocks of proteins, which are essential for every living thing we know of. He had shown that the leap from non-living chemicals to the basic stuff of life wasn't just possible, it might have been unavoidable.
Okay, so we've got the raw materials, we've got a planet full of organic soup. But how do you go from a few amino acids to something as complex as a whale or a giant redwood tree? For that, you need an engine, a process that can drive change and build complexity over time. And the person who figured out that engine was, of course, Charles Darwin.
Darwin's big idea was natural selection. And really, it's a beautifully simple concept. Look at any group of living things, and you'll see variation, right? Some are a little faster, a little bigger, a little better at hiding. If one of those random traits gives an individual an edge in its environment, it's more likely to survive and have kids, and it'll pass that winning trait on. Over millions of years, the whole population changes.
And here's a really key point we have to get right. When we talk about survival of the fittest, we usually think of the strongest or fastest animal. But in Darwin's world, fitness means only one thing. How good are you at having babies that survive? It doesn't matter if you're the strongest lion on the savannah. If you don't pass on your genes from an evolutionary standpoint, you're not fit at all.
The cool thing is, this isn't just some abstract theory. We can actually watch it happen. The textbook example is the peppered moth in England. See, before the Industrial Revolution, most of these moths were a light speckled color, which was perfect camouflage against the lichen-covered trees. The dark-colored ones were really rare because they stood out and got eaten by birds.
But then, factories started pumping out tons of soot, which killed the lichen and turned the tree trunks dark and grimy. All of a sudden, the game completely flipped. The light moths were now easy targets, while the rare dark moths were perfectly hidden. So the dark moths survived, had more babies, and in just a few decades, almost the entire moth population in those industrial areas had become dark. And this little moth story tells us something absolutely crucial about evolution. It doesn't have a plan. The moths didn't decide to become darker. A random variation, the dark color, just happened to be a winning ticket when the environment suddenly changed. It's this incredible dance between random chance and the pressures of the real world.
So natural selection gives us this powerful engine for change. But how do we know it's the story for all of life, going back billions of years? Well, scientists act like detectives, following a trail of clues that life has left behind.
And these clues come from all over the place. We've got paleontology, digging up fossils. We've got comparative anatomy, which is looking at the similarities and differences between living creatures. We can look at how embryos develop. And maybe the most powerful clue of all is in our biochemistry and genes, our very DNA. All of these different lines of evidence point to the exact same conclusion.
Let's just take one of those, comparative anatomy. Think about your arm. Now, think about a whale's flipper and a bat's wing. One's for grabbing, one's for swimming, one's for flying. Totally different jobs, right? But if you look at the bones inside, the pattern is shockingly similar. This pattern is what we call a homologous structure, and it's screaming evidence that humans, whales, and bats all inherited that basic arm design from a common ancestor way back when. But you gotta be careful. Now compare a bird's wing to a butterfly's wing. They both do the same thing, they're for flying, but their internal structure is completely different. One is bone, the other is not. These are called analogous structures. They show us how totally different lines of life can independently come up with similar solutions to the same problem. Pretty cool, huh?
So, after billions of years of this grand, branching story, with countless species coming and going, we finally get to one of its newest little twigs, us. Let's zoom in on the incredible and surprisingly recent story of our own evolution.
This is our family tree in a nutshell. While our ancient primate relatives have been around for millions of years, our specific journey really kicks off in Africa, about 3 to 4 million years ago, with the first apes who started walking on 2 legs. From there, you see this amazing progression: Homo habilis, the handyman who made the first tools. Then Homo erectus, with a bigger brain, who ventured out of Africa. Much, much later came our cousins, the Neanderthals, and then finally, us, Homo sapiens.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The story is literally written in our bones. When you line up the fossils of our ancestors, you see these undeniable trends. The jaw gets smaller, the face gets flatter, and the brain case, the part of the skull that holds the brain, just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like watching our own evolution on fast forward.
But what's really fascinating is that our evolution wasn't just physical. It was a feedback loop. A bigger brain allowed us to make better tools. Better tools meant we could get more meat, which is high-energy food. And that extra energy fueled the growth of an even bigger brain. This cycle is what drove the explosion of human culture, making art, developing complex societies, burying our dead, and eventually inventing agriculture, which changed everything.
And that brings us to today. The story of evolution shows us that life isn't climbing some ladder towards a perfect goal. It's a messy, random, branching process driven by chance and circumstance. We're not the end point. We're just one tiny, recent branch on an enormous tree, which leaves us with a really fascinating question to ponder. Now that we have technology that can shape our own world and even our own genes, what does the next chapter of human evolution even look like?